your source for news, commentary, discussion, and debate at the intersection of the atheist movement and the LGBT rights movement. This is the Atheist Manifesto. Hello, dear friends, and welcome to the Atheist Manifesto. I am your host, Callie Wright. Unfortunately not joined by my fabulous co-host, Ari Stillman, though they do indeed remain fabulous. This week's episode is a subject we have touched on before, but it's something that is certainly worthy of ongoing attention, and that is being trans in the workplace. So before we jump in, I want to throw some quick numbers out there to sort of illustrate the problem. And these are United States-centric numbers, but I think this will give you an interesting picture, right? So 1 in 4 LGBT employees report experiencing employment discrimination in the last 5 years, raising my hand because that's me. The transgender unemployment rate is 3 times higher than the national average. Over 1/4 of trans people who held or applied for a job in the last year report being fired, not hired, or denied a promotion due to their gender identity. More than 3/4 of transgender employees take steps to avoid mistreatment in the workplace, also raising my hand because me. In 2014, more than 1 in 4 LGBT adults, 2.2 million people, struggled to put food on the table. There is no federal law barring employment discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity, and state laws are kind of a big mishmash. In 28 states, you can get fired just for being any flavor of queer. In 30 states, you can be fired for being trans. 22 states and the District of Columbia prohibit employment discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and or gender identity by statute. Believe it or not, the majority of Americans, 67%, support federal laws protecting transgender people from employment discrimination. 71% of Americans support federal laws protecting LGBT people from discrimination in housing, public accommodations, and jobs. So just like the gun question, the majority of people in this country want the right thing, but we can't actually make it happen because we live in an actual dumpster fire. So a dear friend of the show recently had a pretty rough experience at her job, ending with her losing it. Bethany Turner, welcome back to the show, friend.
Gaytheists, come on, grab your friends. We're going to talk about some really gay stuff. Callie the host and Beth the guest and a conspicuously absent Ari. It's Gaytheists.
Oh my God, that's the greatest thing ever.
I told you you'd enjoy that.
Fantastic. Oh my God, that's so good. And for those who didn't get the reference, that was to the tune of the Adventure Time theme song, which is absolutely one of my favorite things in the world right now. So thank you for that. I appreciate that.
It is one of my favorite cartoons as well.
It's just so good. So you reached out via Facebook Messenger and said that you'd had a pretty rough experience with all of this and thought it might be a good subject for the show. And we did do a trans in the workplace episode. It was quite some time ago. And if memory serves, I think most of what we talked about was largely positive with some negative stuff strewn in there. So yeah, I think this is a topic that can never get enough coverage. So why don't you just tell us what happened?
The thing about my most recent experience is that I am currently appealing the decision to terminate my employment with my former employer. So because it's under it's under appeal at the moment. So I don't want to give too much detail about where I worked.
Fair.
Because there could be repercussions if in the unlikely event that somebody at that employer listens to the Gaytheist Manifesto. I somehow doubt that, though, but you never know.
You say, hopefully if they were, this wouldn't be a position you would be in, but, stranger things have happened.
Yeah, that's a fair comment. But anyway, to put it simply, where I worked was a call center, and it was a pretty miserable experience for me from the get-go because, I mean, I made myself a promise back when I was still looking for work. Well, before now, I should say. That I wouldn't A, work in a call center, or B, have to commute to work. And I ended up breaking both of those promises to work at this place because the situation I was in was just so desperate at the time that I basically had to take whatever job I was offered, which was not fun. And the thing about working in this place was I was frequently misgendered on the phone because I guess I don't have the most feminine sounding voice. So when I answer the phone, I would immediately get people calling me sir, and this was really difficult for me to deal with. And the problem was my employers just didn't take it seriously, if you know what I mean. It was like I would try and explain to them why this hurts me so much when this happens, and I just wanted them to be a bit more understanding about how stressful it was and why I was having such difficulty with the job. And they were all like, oh yes, well, sometimes I get called the wrong thing as well. And I was like, okay, but calling you a different calling you Sandra instead of Sasha is not quite the same thing.
Well, and even being misgendered as a cis person, it's not the same experience, right?
It's not, because for a trans person, you're never entirely sure if the misgendering is an honest mistake or if it's deliberate, because they're like, well, you say you're a woman, but you don't sound like a woman to me, so I'm not going to call you one, and I'm not going to respect the fact that you want to be addressed as one. And there was one occasion where I had a caller who was repeatedly misgendering me, and I got a little impatient with him, and was just like, yeah, you're going to need to stop calling me sir, or I'm going to end this call. And his response basically was to start laughing.
Oh, God.
And yeah, that was... I think that was the day of the beginning of the downward spiral for me at my former employer. It wasn't long after that they actually took me off the phones, which was kind of a blessing in some ways, and to use that, I suppose, somewhat religious term, but whatever. Anyway, they took me off the phones and they put me on a thing called web chat. Now, I don't know if you ever used web chat when dealing with customer service before. Yeah,
the company that I work for has a chat thing that I often get complained to about by people who call in.
They had that at my previous office as well, and I found it better because nobody was misgendering me on web chat because they couldn't hear my voice. So they would just see my name, and that was fine. Yeah, eventually I had an altercation with a manager, and it resulted in my suspension. And after 9 months, which is the longest time anyone has been suspended from this particular employer, so go me, they finally decided that they were going to sack me, as we say over here. You say fire over there, we tend to say sack over here. I think that, interestingly, the difference between firing and sacking, I think it goes back to a time when if somebody was dismissed from a job, they would call it being fired because they would burn their tools. Whereas sacking was they would give you your things in a sack, or give you a sack to take your things and leave in. That's what I've heard. I don't know how true it is. I guess write in if you know better.
Yeah, I mean, it would make sense.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, the whole time that I was at this employer, I just didn't feel like I was getting the support that I needed. They acted very, very understanding, but at the same time, it was very dismissive, if you know what I mean.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I work in a call center and have for a little over 3 years now. And I mean, that was the thing that I dealt with. I mean, I have a phone voice that I kind of put on when I'm talking to customers, and it's pretty rare that I get misgendered on the phone now. But when I first started, I had done basically no work at all in my voice, and I was misgendered
Yeah.
constantly. And I always kind of went back and forth between like, sometimes it was like, I mean, it was just like constant, like somebody poking me in the stomach, like, hey, you're different. How does that feel? You know? And then sometimes I was able to like, okay, like I have a 10-minute relationship with this person. Why do I care? And I was kind of able to shrug it off. And there was like no way to predict which it was going to be. And I think I got to the point where I was kind of ambiguous enough where people just kind of stopped gendering me altogether on like 70 or 80% of my calls. So like that was nice. But the big difference for me is that I've never felt anything but supported at work. So like if I went to my supervisor, like, oh God, these callers, they keep misgendering me. They laugh at me when I'm like, at the very least, they'd be like, oh my God, that's terrible. I'm so sorry that happened. And like, you know, we'd be able to commiserate, and they'd like, you know, throw support behind me and stuff like that. So like even dealing with that, like, I feel like it would at least be a little bit easier because I had that support, but you didn't.
No, see, what you had was brilliant. And I think things were just so much better for me at my last job if I'd had that kind of support. But the attitude they had was basically, well, just deal with it. I mean, a lot of us have unpleasant calls. We all go through unpleasant calls every day here. You just need to learn to deal with it. And sometimes they would just go straight to, are you not able to do this job? With the implication of that question being, if the answer to that question is no, we should consider letting you go.
Yeah, and that's just, it's gross because on the one hand, like there is a kernel of truth in that, right? Like working at a call center is not a universally pleasant experience. You take a lot of abuse, right? And there are certain kinds of people who just can't handle a job like that. And you know, the way that I always frame it when I'm talking to people is like, I came into this thinking that I wasn't going to be good at this job and not lasting. And it turns out like I am good at it. And I think a lot of people frame it like, well, if this isn't for you, like that's a negative thing. Like they're sort of positioning themselves as being better than you when they say stuff like that. And for me, it's just like, you know, just like very physical jobs aren't for some people, very sedentary jobs aren't for some people, call center jobs aren't for some people. Like there is a kernel of truth in that, right? But
absolutely.
But there is an entirely different context when we're talking about, I mean, any marginalized group, right? Because I listen to calls all of the time. Where this guy we work with, he's from Nigeria. He has an accent, and he's not a difficult person to understand. At least, I mean, I have good hearing, so maybe it's different for me. But he's not someone that I find difficult to understand when he talks. But he's constantly getting abuse. I want to talk to somebody in the United States, and he tries to explain like, I'm in Cincinnati, Ohio. You are talking to someone in the United States. I am an American citizen, and I don't believe you. I want to talk to somebody in America. And it's like,
I've had such similar experiences at my office, actually, because as you know, but the listeners may not be aware, I actually live in Edinburgh in Scotland. And so that meant that most of my colleagues at my old office were, in fact, from Scotland. I'm from Nottingham originally, so I don't have a Scottish accent, although I'm half Scottish. But Nottingham's where I grew up, so I kind of have what I like to call a nondescript English accent.
Yeah.
But so most of the people at my call center would have been people with Scottish accents, and they were from Midlothian. The Midlothian accent is quite strong. Actually, no, it wasn't even Midlothian. Midlothian's where I am. As I said, I had to commute to work, so I actually had to commute to a contact center in West Lothian, which is like halfway to Glasgow from Edinburgh. Like Edinburgh is on the east side of Scotland, Glasgow's on the west side. And the accent in the middle there in West Lothian is a lot stronger than here in Edinburgh. So you would occasionally get people calling up and saying, oh, thank goodness, I'm finally speaking to somebody with an English accent. I can't understand those bloody Scots. And I'm like, well, I'm sorry, but I actually happen to live in Scotland, and you're insulting a fair few of my colleagues when you say that, so please don't.
Yeah, and it's so hard to make people understand the difference in context, right? Because I mean, there are plenty of people who call in and like to throw around homophobic slurs, and like that's not a pleasant experience. Oh yeah,
or just overtly racist stuff. I had somebody on the phone one time. how can I say this without giving away too much of where I worked? Anyway, I worked in some capacity to do with welfare, I should say. That's not giving away because there's various different. I worked in the civil service. I won't say which department, but I did work in a capacity where people on low incomes would receive money to help support them. And I got one call one time, which was a really frustrating call because I actually had two people on the phone yelling at me.
Oh, those are the worst.
Yeah, it's like a woman called up and her partner was in the background yelling things. And I was like, okay, you're going to have to decide which of you's talking to me because I'm not going to talk to the both of you. and eventually she was asking, well, why aren't we getting more money? And I was like, well, under the existing legislation, you're not entitled to more money than you're getting. And, well, her boyfriend pipes up in the background. It's because we're not black, isn't it?
Oh, God.
They hung up shortly after, but they hung up basically when I started going to, you know what, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to tolerate racist comments on this call. But before I could complete the thought, though, they'd hung up on me.
Yeah, and it's so hard to communicate how different that context is for people. Like, obviously, like, nobody enjoys having that stuff thrown at them, but when you happen to be the person who is the target of those things, so, you know, people of color being forced to listen to racism or,
Absolutely.
you know, there's a guy that I work with who has, he has kind of a stereotypically gay sounding voice, like what you think of when you hear like what a stereotypically gay person sounds like. Like, I hate to describe it that way, but I think
there's a certain stereotype. Yeah,
exactly.
No, I know exactly what you mean.
And I mean, that's got him called the F word on a couple of calls. And
I'm guessing he's not remotely gay.
No, he is.
Oh, he is. Okay, fair enough.
But you know, so it's like that at a person who isn't gay is, I mean, it's not pleasant, right? But when they are actually the target of that, you know, I mean, I was on a call once where somebody somewhat famous, I guess, had come out as trans or something along, like, I don't remember the exact context, but I was on the phone with this person. I was just fixing their internet and there was a conversation happening in the background. Like, I have really, really good ears. Like, I have a really good ability to distinguish like background sounds from conversation and stuff like that when it's quiet. And sometimes that's a blessing and sometimes it's not. And so as I'm waiting for this person to like reboot their modem or something, there's this conversation happening in the background and they're like, oh yeah, I don't think I could ever date someone who's dated a transgender person. Like, that's just gross. Like, I'm not okay with that. I'm just like, hi, right here, guys. Thanks. You know,
that's so weird. I wouldn't date somebody who's dated a trans person. That's
right.
That's like an extra level of absurd, because it's like, I wouldn't date a trans person. No, I wouldn't date a person who's dated a trans person.
Right. Like, it's
WTF,
just,
mate.
Exactly. And then so, you know, we have people who are supervisors and managers who I mean, just plain don't understand the experience, right? And again, thankfully, in my situation, I have people who are very understanding and supportive, even if they aren't gay or trans themselves. Like, they're very willing to listen and very willing to let me vent and explain these things, and they're very compassionate about that.
And that's what matters. I mean, I don't expect someone who's not trans to understand what I'm feeling when this sort of thing happens, but at least listen and at least listen and acknowledge that I know what I'm talking about and I know what I'm feeling.
Right, and that it's real. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not just making this stuff up. Like, this is real, and it really affects my ability to function.
Honestly, I feel that at my previous office, the attitude they had was, because when I got into this sort of thing, I would like be sat down with a manager who would sit there and talk to me and be like, but you know, if you want to get anything you want in life, you've got to work. And I just felt like, what? I'm not disputing this. Why is this even something you're bringing up? I am here working to earn money so that I can take care of myself. That is entirely why I do this shitty job. And it's like, I get the impression from management that they think that I'm just trying to avoid work by pretending that I'm upset about something when I'm not really. And it really pissed me the fuck off. Excuse my exceedingly bad language.
Hi, I'm Callie. Have we met? No, I hear that.
You bet your fucking ass we've met. Just not IRL yet, because I'll give you a big fucking hug when we do.
Oh my God, you have so many hugs coming when we meet in Meet Space for the first time.
I have it on good authority from pretty much everyone I've hugged over the last decade that I give excellent hugs. And I understand that you do as well. So I'm guessing when the two of us get together and we hug, it will be like this awesome hug upon which the universe will fold in upon itself and be reborn somehow.
I was going to say there might be a tear in the space-time continuum when that happens. So like maybe we should warn some folks when we know that's going to happen.
Maybe we should want people to stand clear.
So just keep an eye out on the Gaytheist Manifesto Facebook page. We'll make that announcement to make sure that nobody's unduly affected. But you know, I think this illustrates something, kind of a broader point that I think often gets lost when we talk about what it's like to be trans in the workplace in general, right? Because most people, I think, get the idea when we have these conversations that it's as simple as you're trans, I don't like that, therefore you're fired. Or like, you're trans, I don't like that, therefore I'm going to make your life so miserable that you're not comfortable here anymore and you're going to go away. And to be sure, plenty of that happens, right?
Oh, certainly. More so over there, I think, than over here, because we do have anti-discrimination laws UK-wide here that prevent that, at least theoretically. Obviously, if people really want to get rid of you because you're trans, they'll invent a reason to do so.
Oh, for sure.
But at least on paper, they can't do that.
Yeah, and so what ends up happening oftentimes is it's a little more subtle and complicated than that, right? So like...
it's insidious is what it is.
Yes, that is a great word to use. At the last job that I had, I did, high-end home theater, home automation, audio, video, like all this really cool, like technological stuff, like close your shades and turn your lights off from your iPad kind of stuff. It was really cool. I enjoyed the work. And when I came out, the conversation was, listen, I really don't care. It really makes no difference to me if you're trans, if you're a man, if you're a woman, if you're gay, I don't care. But our clientele is going to care. We have very rich, very conservative clients, and a lot of those folks are just plain not going to let you in their house anymore after you come out. And the thing that made me so mad is like, he's not wrong when he says that. And this is a small company. At the time, I think there were 4 of us total in the entire company. And this is the way this guy feeds his family. And so do I put pressure on him to turn him into an activist and lose him business and hurt his ability to feed his family? Like, if we're talking about a company that has millions and billions of dollars in revenue and, this person's rich, whatever, but like, this guy's not rich. Like, I mean, he's okay. He's well off, but he's not super rich. And if he loses his business, like he loses everything. Right. And so like, he's not wrong to be thinking about that stuff. And I heard enough of our clients talking about queer and trans stuff to know that he wasn't wrong. Like, some of these people were actively, like violently homophobic and probably transphobic. And
the two tend to go hand in hand.
Right. And so, what do you do with that? Because I initially offered, like, look, if this is going to be too much for you, I'm not trying to turn you into an activist. Like, I'll find somebody to hire to replace me and I'll go find work somewhere else. And I think what I hold him responsible for is he kept saying like, oh no, we'll figure it out. And we never did. And he broke a lot of promises to me about that. And so like, I feel justifiably angry about that side of things, but not necessarily the struggle that he had with like, so I want to keep you as an employee because you're good at what you do and I like you. And it doesn't bother me even a little bit that you're trans, but it complicates things with my clients. Like, I get that part of it. But it's so often not as simple as you're trans, therefore you're fired. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, I ended up just like, okay, well, I can kind of see where this is going. I think I'm just going to quit. And that's kind of what it came down to. And I mean, luckily I landed on my feet where I'm at. I'm in a great position where I'm at. Where I work is a very happy place to be queer and trans. There's an entire contingent of trans folks that we're like a gang. We're going to take the place over.
That's fantastic. I mean, at my office, I think I was literally the only trans person there, and I didn't know if there were any other LGBT people of any stripe there. I was technically the LGBT officer, but it was kind of a title without any responsibilities, because it was like
A group
it's a
of
position.
one, as far as you
Yeah,
know.
exactly. I was representing myself essentially.
Yeah. And so you alluded to some past experience too beyond this last job. You want to talk about that?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I first I came out as trans 5 years ago, and at the time I wasn't gainfully employed, but I was volunteering at the local hospital radio. And the problem with that was I was still at the very early stage of my coming out process. I was like out to a couple of friends, but not out to everybody yet. And so going to work at the hospital radio, I did so under my old name, and that was how they were introduced to me. And so,
Hang on for just a second. When you say hospital radio, what is that?
well, basically the local hospitals, both of them. There's two major hospitals in Edinburgh. There's the Western General, which is within walking distance of where I live, and there's the Royal Infirmary, which is on the other side of town. And there's a radio studio in the Western General, which broadcasts over both the hospitals. Now, the patients can get a headset that they can use to listen to the radio from their hospital beds or the ward or wherever they are. And they would have a request show in the evening where they would request songs, and if it was in the record library, they'd play it for them. And they also did contests and stuff where you could win cookies and stuff.
Oh, wow, that's actually pretty cool.
It was really cool, and I actually really enjoyed working there, because what we would do is we put the request show together by going around the wards and talking to the patients and asking them what song they would like to hear that evening. And the problem with that was they liked my voice, and this is before I did anything on working on my voice, and they kind of wanted me to be one of the DJs, which I really didn't want to do.
Awkward.
Because they were going to call me by my old name and use male pronouns and everything, and I was like, I really don't want to do that. Can I just work in the record library and produce? So that was what I did the whole time that I was there. But even after I came out to everyone else there, they were all like, oh, yeah, that's fine. We're cool with that. And continued to call me by my old name and use male pronouns around me. So, yeah, eventually I just lost my passion for it, which is a shame, because the reason I went there originally was because I was hoping that I could potentially use it as experience working in a voluntary radio format to get, experience, to get perhaps a job in professional radio, maybe. But, well, given that I just lost the drive that I had for it, it never really worked out that way. I started there in April 2013, and I basically stopped by the end of the year, which it was a shame.
Yeah, I think about that a lot. Like how much lost potential exists in the trans community because, somebody had a passion and interest to drive, and it was just sort of like beaten out of them by the world. I mean, like, people make it so difficult for trans folks to exist in spaces. Like how many amazing things has the world lost, and how much amazing life experience has been lost because of that kind of stuff, Like, for me, I am very good at pretending not to be nervous and scared when I am. And so oftentimes I don't not do things because of that fear. Like I'll go do the thing anyways, but it can suck a lot of the fun and enjoyment out of it because I'm more like worried and anxious about like, oh yeah, like just the other day I went to a bar with some coworkers and they were doing karaoke. And so my first thought is like, well, my singing voice doesn't sound feminine at all. And there's a bunch of rednecks at this bar. Like, what's going to happen? Like what kind of rude comments are people going to make? And I was terrified. I don't think anybody who knew, I don't think anybody who was there with me would have known that. But I mean, I'm just like shaking, terrified on the inside. And like, I feel like there's so much experience like that. Especially if we're talking about the work that we do in employment and volunteering and all of that kind of stuff, like there's got to be a million stories about that.
No doubt. The following year working at the hospital radio, it was great. I liked it. I just wish that they had, when I said, by the way, I'm actually transgender and I want you to call me Bethany and use female pronouns when talking about me. I just wish they'd kind of listened to that, but they were a bunch of old men, so that might be why they were having difficulty with that. But the following year, I ended up working in my first taste of working in a call center. I was working for a market research company, and I wouldn't recommend that to anybody, to be perfectly honest with you, because this is when you're calling people up during dinner time to ask them survey questions.
Oh, that just sounds soul destroying.
Yeah, most of the time, people just hang up on you immediately if you even get an answer. And I counted that as, okay, fine. That's fine. I don't have to do any work just here. Just move on to the next call. And more of those, please, because that way I don't have to do any work. But the thing is, they were grading you on your performance on calls that you actually got. And it was, so you kind of don't want to do the work, but you kind of do, if you know what I mean.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because the thing about this particular company is, are you familiar with 0-hour contracts?
No, I don't think I know what that means.
Right. A 0-hour contract, it's been a thing in British politics for the last number of years now. Basically, it's an employer who you are technically employed with, but there's no guarantee of work from them. So you don't actually have a secure or stable income. If there's work to do that week, you might get 16 hours, you might get 30 hours, you might get 0 hours. It's entirely based on how many people they need in, and whether or not you are one of the lucky people who gets any hours that week. And that was the problem here. Basically, the choice hours of the week went to the people who had the highest grades on calls. So I think I only ever managed to get into the C bracket, which meant that if I wanted to schedule hours to work for the following week, I could not call to ask for those hours before Wednesday. People in the B bracket could call from Tuesday onwards. People in the A bracket could call from Monday onwards. So needless to say, if there was a lack of hours in the following week, the people who called on Monday would grab all those hours and everyone else would be SOL. So that was the position I was in there, which is why I left that job eventually, because I had to go back to the job center and say, look, this is ridiculous. I'm not actually getting the work because it was the job center that got me this job in a sort of roundabout way. And fortunately, they actually listened to me and didn't think that I was just leaving the job because I didn't like it. I mean, that was true. I didn't like the job and was quite happy to leave it. But yeah, they were like, okay, that's fine. I mean, it's not secure employment, so that's fine. We'll put you straight back onto job seekers allowance, which was good because I just wasn't getting anything out of that particular company. So so that was bad. But the thing about my experience being trans there was they made me use my dead name on the phones.
That's gross. Was there a reason for that? Was it just because like you hadn't changed your name legally and they're like, well, you got to use what's legal? Or like, what was the thing with that?
That was precisely it. They said it was a liability issue. because my legal name hadn't yet changed. They wanted me to use what was on my passport, and et cetera, et cetera. So, so that was annoying. But the way I treated it while I was there was, I was like, okay, when I'm on the phone, I'm playing a character. I'm not myself, I'm somebody else, and that's how I'll deal with it. But yeah, it was really quite annoying. And the thing is, I hadn't legally changed my name when I got to my most recent employer either, but they never made me use my dead name on the phone. And when I asked about it, they were like, you can call yourself whatever you want on the phone. If somebody has a complaint against you, they just need to, it's fine because we record all of our calls anyway. So if somebody has a complaint, they just say, yeah, I called at this time and it was so-and-so going by this name. And yeah, they can, as long as they know the name that you're using on the phone. I mean, it's not like you can answer the phone and say, yeah, hi, I'm Amanda Hug and Kiss.
Right.
So as long as they knew, I mean, they actually said, if you want to use a pseudonym because you don't want your real name being used on the phones, that's also fine. Just make sure you tell us what it is. So in that sense, my last employer was better in that regard. So it made me wonder, looking back at this other place, this market researcher that I worked for briefly, if I just said that to them, look, can we just go by a pseudonym? Because if somebody has a complaint against me, you can still trace it to the person who they were talking to, surely. But I don't know. Maybe they didn't have the infrastructure for that. I don't know. At this point, I don't care. It's not a place I'm going to work for again.
For sure. Yeah. Well, and I mean, that brings up a whole couple of other things, because that's something that's actually been suggested where I work is like, if you're having trouble doing the job, like, then put on a character. Like, you know, use a different name, whatever you have to do. Like, just tell your supervisor that's what you're doing. So when they're listening to their calls, like, they know I'm Callie, but I'm calling myself Stephanie or something like that. Like, just so that they know what's going on. It's not a big deal, right? Because it all ties back to your employee ID and it's all recorded and all of that's fine. But with
exactly.
What that reminds me of is at my old job, the one that I ended up losing, for about a year, I was out in the rest of my entire life, but not at work. Because my boss had valid concerns about the way that some of our clientele were going to react. And so my thought at the time was, well, getting to be my true self most of the time or some of the time is better than none of the time, right? And at first that was 100% true, but then it became, well, it's really terrible that I can't be my true self the entire time. And so like on Sunday nights when I'm getting ready for work the next morning, I got to take my nail polish off. I got to wash my makeup off. I got to lay out the gym shorts and t-shirt and it just became this like really sad, like nigh traumatic ritual of taking off my true self and putting this dude costume back on. And eventually that, I mean, I really think that did long-term psychological damage to me, because before I went through all of that, I never had like random depressive episodes or like random anxiety episodes or anything like that. And that happens to me now. And maybe I should talk to my therapist about it to get like an official call on that. But there's lots of things that I kind of point back to that time in my life and think like that never really happened to me before I had that experience. And that's like, you know, one of the worst times in my life was when I was, for all intents and purposes, going back and forth between being two different people. And I like kind of underestimated the toll that would take on me. And so like, you know, I imagine for some people, I think that would work very well. But for me, it very much did not. Like, I didn't handle that well at all. So it's like, you know, what do you do in those situations like that?
Yeah. And talking of the psychological damage, I'm pretty sure I've suffered psychological damage from my last employer, just the way they treated me over time.
Well, like, sure, yeah.
In the last over the last year, certainly I've had depressive episodes now and then. They were particularly bad last summer. It's not been so bad recently because, despite my employment situation, things are okay for me at the moment. So, so things are a bit better. But it was just the constant grind of doing this job and the constant fear of being misgendered and how I was going to react to that and the lack of support that I would get at work. It was like a perfect storm of things, for lack of a better word, it just made me hate myself at times, if you know what I mean.
Talk more about that. Why did it make you hate yourself?
Well, I guess it was because I felt like I was a failure, because I was stuck doing this job, the kind of job that I promised myself I would never do. And I mean, I've already said I was working for the civil service, so I was working for the UK government, which means I was working for the Conservative Party of the UK in a roundabout way. And they're monsters, to be quite honest with you. They are vicious monsters who have hurt so many people. And part of me constantly said to myself, if you had any integrity, you would quit your job rather than work for these bastards. And then another part of me said, well, I've got to eat. And if I quit my job, the way it works in the UK is if you quit your job, you can't claim benefits for 6 weeks. And if you're living paycheck to paycheck like I was, 6 weeks is too long to go without any income.
Yeah.
And they know that. That's why they have that rule, so that people in low-income positions like myself can't quit our jobs. So yeah, I think that's, I felt so trapped. The only silver lining to it all was that I was working part-time, because I did start off there working full-time, but that was just, I couldn't do that. Basically, with the commute there and back, it was a 3-hour round trip to get to the office and back.
Yikes.
And working for about 8 hours a day, plus that 3 hours traveling, I had no free time during the week. And some weekends I had to work Saturdays as well. And if you're working Saturday, you have to be at the office for 8 o'clock in the morning. And to get to that office from where I live meant getting up at 4:30 in the morning at the latest.
That's a nightmare. God.
So, I mean, frequently in the winter, it wasn't even light by the time I got to the office. So that was just horrible.
Yay,
and,
capitalism.
Yay, capitalism. I mean, technically I was working for the government, so not strictly capitalism, but they have an entire...
Right.
The office I work at has an entirely corporate model. They are running it like a business. They even refer to it as a business sometimes, which is just like, yeah, okay. But then I suppose that's what happens when you have the Tories running things, because conservatives think everything should be run as a business, even vital services that people would die without.
Oh, God.
But... yeah, the one job that I've done over the last 5 years where I didn't have a single problem at all, and you know me well enough, Kelly, to not be at all surprised by this. It was when I was volunteering at the Edinburgh Dog and Cat Home in early 2015, and at the interview, I just said, "Yeah, by the way, I'm transgender," and they're like, "Yeah, okay, that's fine," and nobody ever misgendered me. They always called me by the right name. It was like, God, if I was being paid for this, I'd stay here. Unfortunately, it was voluntary, so I wasn't going to get paid for it. But I think it helped me get through what was actually a very dark chapter in my life, because it was before I started working at my last employer, and I was getting pretty desperate to find work at the time. Mm-hmm. So going out there to the Edinburgh Dog and Cat Home once a week and looking after the dogs there, I think that really helped.
God, if I could make a living just like hanging out with dogs all day.
Ugh.
Like,
Yeah, the one problem was that I met this lovely little terrier called Tina, who I absolutely fell in love with. I think she fell in love with me as well. And one time I just went and sat in her kennel with her, and she just came and sat in my lap, like just climbed into my lap, and I just cuddled her for a bit.
oh,
She was such a sweet little dog.
that's so precious.
I know. I wish to goodness that I could have adopted her. It's just I couldn't afford it.
Yeah.
And I was really quite sad when I had to leave there. I actually asked them to let me know if she got adopted, and they did. She got adopted about 4 weeks after I started at my last employer. So I was really happy about that, because she was 10 years old, and older dogs are harder to adopt.
Right.
Because people don't expect them to live as long. And I just wanted to make sure that she had a nice home for the rest of her life.
Life is hard. That's all.
Yeah.
It's all fucking silly. Well, Bethany, thank you for coming on the show and sharing your experience. I think there's a lot of universality in the things that we've experienced and that trans folks experience in the workplace, and queer folks too. There's a little bit less visibility. You have a little bit more of a choice to out yourself as queer than you do as trans. I actually had I had an interesting conversation. I went to see a movie with a friend last night, and he was like, "So how's married life?" And I was like, "I mean, it's cool that I get to use the word wife now, but honestly, it's really not that different. Like, I mean, we still live together, and and
things haven't changed all that much."
Yeah, but what's interesting is now, like, I work with a lot of new hire classes at work, and I'm using the word wife instead of fiance. So I immediately out myself as queer every time I have a conversation with someone that involves, anything domestic, right? And so like that changes the dynamic a little bit. And of course, again, I work in a place where I know that's not a problem. So if anybody in the room has a problem with it, they can go to hell, because that's a them problem, not a me problem, and not a work problem. And that's been made very clear to me on several occasions that, like, this is a place where that's okay. And if anybody gives you problems for that, like, that's going to be a problem for them. So like, it's easier for me in that way, but it is also like, well, everybody in the room knows I'm queer now because it's wife instead of fiance. So it's just, it's interesting stuff. But again, thank you so much for coming on the show. One more time, all the love. Mwah.
It's been my absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
That, my friends, is going to do it for this episode of the Gaytheist Manifesto. If you think what we do here is important, please share this around to your friends. Search the Gaytheist Manifesto on Facebook and Twitter to find us there. I'm at Gaytheist Callie on Twitter, and you can email us at podcast@thegaytheistmanifesto.com. We're a part of the Trans Podcaster Visibility Initiative. We are a group of trans podcasting badasses working to bring more trans voices into podcasting and other content creation. Search for the Trans Podcaster Visibility Initiative on Facebook if you want to learn more. If you want to support the show and the activism we do, you can head to patreon.com/thegaytheistmanifesto, make a per episode donation as little as $1 per episode. And if you can't do that, you can still give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and share us around to your friends. It all helps and it all makes a difference. Before we go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares and no one understands, you need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, knows that you're capable of amazing things, and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friends, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto.
Bye-bye.